Tony Stark subscribed to this podcast in a cave with a box of scraps. That's right, you've just stepped into a bigger podcast universe. You just don't realize it yet as we check out Iron Man, this time on Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. Welcome to Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. I'm Dan.
I'm Heather.
And Heather, I am so excited today because today we are taking our first steps into the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It's very intimidating.
I am in fact still an MCU stan, even though they've had some rough patches lately. I love these movies, and I am really happy that we are finally going to be able to get to them.
I'm excited too.
That doesn't really sound like excitement.
It's a little overwhelming, but I'm sure it'll be an adventure.
Now, technically, you have seen Iron Man before. Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you remember about this movie?
I don't remember a ton. I remember that Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark, who is some kind of a Richie Rich, and he creates the Iron Man suit, essentially. I don't know why. I don't remember what he does with it once it's been created. I don't remember anything else that really happens plot-wise in the movie. So the main character and the fact that he creates this apparatus. I know that he has, I believe she's his assistant, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, whose name is Pepper Potts.
Oh, you do remember?
I remember that because Pepper Potts is also a soup.
It's a soup?
Yeah.
What kind of
Pepper pot, I think, is the soup.
Okay.
I don't remember what's in the soup, but I love soup. So that's the association in my mind.
That's your association. His assistant is soup.
Yes. I remember liking her more than I expected to, knowing that she was in the movie, or, you know, when it started and I saw her, because I am not the biggest fan of Gwyneth Paltrow. So I kind of expected to dislike her, but I remember her character being charming.
I will say, you know, Gwyneth Paltrow, the person, and Gwyneth Paltrow, the actress, I'm able to put up a firewall there because I do like her performances and most everything I've seen her in. I think she's a good actress and she gives great performances. But then when you get into the stuff like Goop and all of her extracurricular shenanigans.
That's a very fair point, but I am the type of person that has a harder time separating the artist from the, what is the saying?
Goop salesman.
From the Goop salesman. Just in general, if I dislike an actor for their personal life, that does tend to bleed into my opinion of their performances.
Do you remember, besides Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow, do you remember anyone else in this movie?
No.
Okay. Do you remember who directed it?
I'm thinking, but no.
Okay. And are there any other plot details or scenes that come to mind? Anything that stands out?
No. It is really amazing how my mind works. How my brain can remember certain things pretty vividly, and then the rest of it is just a complete blank.
Right. So we started this podcast journey because you and I had watched the Harry Potter movies together, which I had not seen, but you were a big fan of. And originally the idea was this was going to be Heather watches the MCU. We expanded it to a lot of other movies because there are a lot of movies that you haven't seen. But that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about this because, you know, I really, really love these movies and they are a lot of fun. And I am looking forward to re-experiencing them along with you.
Well, we've talked about this off podcast, but part of the reason I haven't seen most of the movies in the MCU world, what is it? MC universe? Is that what they say?
Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Well, I know that, but did they say MCU universe or MC universe?
No, it's just MCU.
Oh, right, because U is the universe. Okay.
Right. It's like ATM machine.
Okay.
The MCU universe.
Yeah. Okay. Is that I just am not drawn to superhero movies, but I have seen a smattering of them over the years.
A smattering.
A
smidget.
A smidgen. A smattering. A little.
An amuse-bouche.
Yeah. This, of course, being one of them. I don't remember which ones are MCU and which ones are DC.
Yeah. So it's funny because there's the MCU, then there's Marvel movies that are not part of the MCU. So there's Marvel movies that were produced by other studios or for other reasons. And then there's DC Comics. And then there's other superhero movies as well that aren't related to either.
Okay. Well, I've seen some and I do tend to enjoy them, even though I never really bought into the whole craze or would seek the movies out. So I'm excited to watch them because I have had good experiences with the superhero movies I've seen.
All right. So released in 2008, this movie, Iron Man, is technically an independent movie. Marvel Comics, then independent, had been licensing out its characters to other movie studios, and there had been a wave of successful superhero movies from Fox with the X-Men franchise and Sony with the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. And Marvel didn't have full control of their characters in their movies. So they took out a $525 million loan and formed Marvel Studios and produced this movie themselves. They just used Paramount for distribution. So this is technically an indie movie, and Marvel literally bet the future of their company on this movie.
It's so weird to think about that being the case, considering how pervasive Marvel Studios seems now.
Yeah, well, and this was well before Disney bought them. You know, this is one of the reasons that Disney bought them. But this is, like I said, it's technically an independent movie.
Wow, that's wild.
Iron Man himself was a third-tier superhero, not anywhere near as popular as the other heroes who had been licensed out to the other studios. And Robert Downey Jr. was not a super bankable star at the time, having just made it out of movie star jail after his very public addiction problems, with a role in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, written and directed by Shane Black. So to direct this movie, this $525 million independent movie, they tapped Jon Favreau.
Oh, okay.
Who at this point, his biggest movie had been Elf.
Okay. He directed that?
He did direct Elf.
Okay.
But that was the biggest movie that he had directed. He had also mostly worked in kind of the indie field and done, you know, the smaller character kind of oriented movies. He did that one movie, and I can never remember the name of it, and I should have looked it up, but it's that movie that was like Space Jumanji. Yeah, it starts with a Z. I don't know anyone who saw that movie. Zathura, A Space Adventure.
Oh, okay. I have heard of that.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard of it, but that was one of his biggest movies to that point. I don't think anyone saw that. So really his biggest success as a director had been Elf.
Which people love.
Yeah, no, it's one of my favorite Christmas movies, and I force everyone I know to watch it every year. So we have a director whose biggest hit was a Christmas comedy, a hero that no one but superhero nerds really knew anything about, and a studio that had never really made a movie before.
Not a recipe for success.
It really wasn't. So it really is kind of remarkable that everything came together the way that it did.
They should make a movie about the making of this movie.
Kind of like the Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the Saturday Night Live movie.
Exactly. I would watch that.
Call Jason Reitman. So,
okay.
Clearly, in hindsight, the movie was a success and it worked out. But how do you think this movie will hold up?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it hold up in terms of what? In terms of, you know, the special effects compared to what's come out in the MCU more recently, which of course I haven't seen a ton of, but know a little bit about, or hold up in the way that we've discussed other movies as being products of their time for the social commentary.
Yeah, either.
I think the special effects will probably not be as good just because those things tend to get better over time. As far as the other aspects of it, I don't know. I have the sense it might hold up okay. I feel like since I have seen this one, maybe I'm biased in the sense that if it held up terribly, I probably would remember that. I probably watched this movie in 2011. So, well, I don't know. That is also a while ago now. I don't remember thinking, oh, this is problematic, but I don't know. It's hard to say. My gut says it'll be okay, but I could be totally wrong.
Okay. Do you remember if you liked it or not?
I remember liking it. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you think that you still will?
I hope so.
Well, me too. So let's find out.
Hey. Let's see them. Show me your hands. Let's see them. Oh, wow, they are small. Very petite indeed. I just need your help for a sec.
God, is that the thing that's keeping you alive?
It was. It is now an antique. This is what will be keeping me alive for the foreseeable future. I was swapping it out for an upgraded unit, and I just ran into a little speed bump.
A speed bump? What does that
It's
mean?
nothing. It's just a little snag. There's an exposed wire under this device, and it's contacting the socket wall, and it's causing a little bit of a short. It's fine.
What
Put
do
that
you want me
on
to
the table
do?
over there. That is irrelevant.
Oh my God.
I just want you to reach in, and you're just going to gently lift the wire out.
Is it safe?
Yeah, it should be fine. It's like operation. You just don't let it touch the socket wall, or
What's
it goes beep.
What do you mean operation?
It's just a game. Never mind. Just gently lift the
Okay.
wire. Okay? Great.
You know, I don't think that I'm qualified to do this.
No, you're fine. You are the most capable, qualified, trustworthy person I've ever met. You can do great. Is it too much of a problem to ask? Because I'm
Okay.
I really need your help here. Okay.
Oh, there's pus.
It's not pus. It's an inorganic plasmic discharge. It's from the device, not from my body.
It smells.
Yeah, it does. The copper wire. The copper wire. You got
Okay,
it?
I got it.
Okay, you got it? Now don't let it touch. Eyes when you're coming out. That's what I was
I'm sorry,
trying to tell you
I'm sorry.
before. Okay, now make sure that when you pull it out, you don't pull out there's a magnet at the end of it. That was it. You just pulled out. Okay.
Oh, God.
I was
Okay.
not expecting.
What
Don't
do
put
I
it back
do?
in.
What
Don't
do
put it
I-
back in.
What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm just going into cardiac arrest because you
What?
yanked it
I thought you
out
said this was
like a
safe.
trout lure. We gotta hurry. Take this.
Okay.
We gotta switch it out really quick.
Okay. Tony.
What?
It's gonna be okay.
Is
Okay.
it?
It's gonna be okay. I am gonna
Let's
make this okay.
hope. Okay, you're gonna attach that to the base plate and make sure you. Yow! Is that so hard? That was fun, eh? Here, I got it here. Nice.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I feel great. You okay?
Don't ever ask me to do anything like that ever again.
I don't have anyone but you.
All right, Heather. So Iron Man, what did you think?
I will say I did not like it as much as I remembered liking it.
Really?
Yeah, but I did still enjoy it for the most part.
Okay.
But I had a memory of really liking it, and it just was kind of okay.
How much did you remember?
Not much at all. I remember the things I talked about in the intro are really the only things that I remembered, that Tony Stark was rich and that he made the Iron Man suit. But honestly, I didn't remember anything about him being held captive and that's why he invented the suit. I kind of had this impression that he had done it just for fun because he was rich.
Just for funsies.
And I didn't remember him being a genius. I thought he was just rich.
Ah, okay.
So yeah,
so like
I
real
didn't-
world billionaire, not like comic book world billionaire.
Yeah, exactly. So I did not remember. I did not retain most of this movie, apparently.
Apparently. But you said you didn't like it as much as you remembered liking it.
Yeah, and I can't really explain why that is. Again, I didn't hate it. I just was like, I had this memory going into this viewing because I'm not a superhero person. I think that I had this memory of being really surprised by how much I enjoyed the movie. So maybe it was because this time I was expecting to really like it. Whereas the first time I saw it, maybe I was thinking, oh, I'm not going to like this, but it's a good movie. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe the element of surprise is what put it in my head that I loved this movie when really I just liked it.
I think it's a fun movie. I really do like it. Do you think that it's held up from 2008?
So I think that the depiction of the characters in Afghanistan, there wasn't really anything.
It wasn't technically Afghanistan, I don't think.
Oh, it said that at the very
Oh,
beginning.
it did say?
It
Okay.
said on the screen, Afghanistan. There wasn't anything specific that I can point to as that was super Islamophobic, but it just made me feel a little icky.
I did think it was interesting that they go out of their way to point out that the Ten Rings, who are the terrorist organization in this movie, and they're a longtime comic book Iron Man foil, they point out that they are an international cadre and there's a lot of different languages spoken, but also given the time and the climate, pretty much everyone that you see looks very Middle Eastern.
Yes, absolutely. And the video that they are making with Stark being held hostage, that's very evocative of videos that were specifically linked with like ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
And I wonder too, because some of those scenes felt a little more jarring now. And I don't know if it's just because now, the US is officially out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and so it's not the reality. So is it that I'm not as desensitized to that any longer? Or is it that when the movie came out, there wasn't as much of that in the news? Like you would have to go to terrible websites to see that kind of thing. You wouldn't necessarily have been saturated with that with like media coverage. I don't know. And I honestly can't remember either, but I do think that's an interesting perspective because, yeah, a lot of the terrorism stuff I do feel felt a lot darker now in context of it being a superhero movie. And you're not there, obviously, but in context of the greater MCU, it's typically not a super dark place. And so this did feel a little bit edgier, for lack of a better word.
Well, the other thing that I really felt during this viewing was how grounded in reality it seemed to me, because I don't think I mentioned the other superhero movies that I have seen, because I've seen a smattering, but not very many. But the ones that I have seen are the Dark Knight trilogy. I've also seen Black Panther and Birds of Prey.
Oh, okay. Birds of Prey, the one, what a random one to have seen.
It was shown to me.
I genuinely liked Birds of Prey.
I
thought
liked
it was
it too.
Fun.
I liked all of those movies, but this was Afghanistan as shown on the screen, whereas the other movies, Gotham City is an amalgam, right? It's not real.
Right.
And Wakanda isn't real. There are elements of reality in those other movies, obviously, because I think that is something that superhero movies have been trying to do, is blend reality with this fictional world. But this was in the real world. It is Afghanistan, and then it's Malibu, California.
Right.
So that really struck me on this viewing.
Marvel does have foreign country substitutes that are frequently used, and some of them are going to come around later on. There's Wakanda that you mentioned, and Sokovia, and other places like that. But they also do have a lot of things that take place in real locations. I think that having it in Afghanistan does feel different now than it did in 2008. And I think that's fair. I think that they probably would have said it in a fictional country, or maybe just not mentioned a real country name now in hindsight.
But on the other hand, at the same time, I was really impacted by particularly the scene where we're watching the news coverage of the refugees who have been impacted by the violence in the Middle East. And that's obviously still relevant today. So it may not be the most sensitive and nuanced view of what is happening in the real world, but I did feel like that news coverage was done pretty well.
Well, when I asked that question, I was thinking of a couple of different things, which is one was, the geopolitical parts of it, the special effects. I do think the special effects still look pretty good. Even today, they aren't as good as later on Marvel movies for the most part, but they still do look really well. But there's one kind of trans gay panic a side joke where Rhodey is talking to some Air Force folks and Tony gives him a hard time about potentially accidentally sleeping with a man.
I did notice that joke. I took it as homophobic, but I can see a transphobic read of it as well.
Right. And it also 100% fails Bechdel. There are two female named characters, and the one conversation they have together is about Tony Stark. So not at all.
No, but I did find those characters interesting.
I wanted to read to you a Stan Lee quote on Tony Stark. Stan Lee said, "I think I gave myself a dare. It was the height of the Cold War. The readers, the young readers, if there was one thing they hated, it was war. It was the military. So I got a hero who represented that to the 100th degree. He was a weapons manufacturer. He was providing weapons for the army. He was rich. He was an industrialist. I thought it would be fun to take the kind of character that nobody would like, none of our readers would like, and shove him down their throats and make them like him. And he became very popular."
That's a really interesting quote. Having not read the comics, obviously, I do have to wonder what Tony's character development and character arc is like in the comics, because obviously in the movie, he does become the hero, but he does that by eschewing his background and condemning the violence that is caused by his weapons. So in that sense, yes, he starts out as a weapons manufacturer who is kind of the worst, but he doesn't become likable through maintaining that characterization.
It's very similar. I was not a huge Iron Man fan. Like I mentioned before, he was really considered like a C-tier hero, but the character arcs are very similar. They don't deal with his alcoholism very much in the movies, but that was a big part of his character. In fact, there was a famous storyline that was called Demon in a Bottle, and that was Tony Stark dealing with alcoholism. I guess the other trait is that Robert Downey Jr. made the character a lot more charming. He wasn't as much of a charming character in the comics, and Robert Downey Jr. is just such a force of personality that also retroactively made the comic book character more charming, and now they write him a lot more in a case of the movies influencing the comics.
100%. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. charming is the exact word. That was the take I had on him at the very beginning of the movie was he is awful, but he's so charming that it's very difficult to dislike him.
In an alternate universe, do you know who the runner-up was for the part of Tony Stark?
No.
Timothy Olyphant.
Ooh, he would have done a good job too.
You think?
I think so.
I think
I don't know if he would have been as good as Robert Downey Jr., but I do think he also has that I'm smug, but I'm also really likable energy.
Yeah, he does, but he doesn't have that manicness to it that Robert Downey Jr. has. And I know part of this is just the roles that he plays. Even on Santa Clarita Diet, where he is a little more high-strung character, he still has this laconic high-strung energy to him. And Robert Downey Jr. doesn't. He's just really got that force of personality.
He does. I have to disagree that Timothy Olyphant can't do manic, though, because I'm thinking of his character in Scream 2. Now, that is one of his very early roles, and I don't know if he's quite as charming in that character, but he is certainly manic.
Well, we know he can pull off a goatee.
And that's all you need, really.
But they really fought. They knew that Robert Downey Jr. was the guy for this, and they fought so hard for him because at the time he really was still in movie star jail. So, and it paid off for everyone.
He did such a good job. He is a very good actor, and I think he manages that transformation of, starting out rich and smarter than everybody else in the room and also attractive. So he is so smug and so cavalier. And then the trauma that he goes through, but then wrestling with what's the right thing to do. I mean, it's larger than life, the entire storyline, and to portray that character and have it feel real and genuine that's pretty impressive.
Okay, so let's dive in. The movie opens up with Back in Black blaring. Tony Stark, drink in hand, is in a Humvee with a bunch of airmen. The movie, I think, does a really good job of making you like the airmen in a very short time. It's really, really good at the expositional dialogue and portraying character in a very economic way. I really do love this movie. Isn't overly long. I think one of the criticisms of Marvel movies in recent times is that they do sometimes have some bloat and might overstay their welcome. This movie is very efficient. It gets in, it does what it needs to do, and it does it in a very satisfying way. So I just remember really liking the way that they introduced Tony Stark in a very short time. You get to learn everything you need to know about him. He's a famous playboy billionaire. You don't know that he's a genius yet, but he is. So he's a playboy billionaire genius. He is super charming, and you get to know these Air Force extras who are then very quickly dispatched.
Yes, I felt bad for them, which is a testament to getting to know them pretty quickly. I didn't remember the explosion specifically, but I did know that it was about to happen. It's possible that some of the things that I was predicting internally as we were watching were things that just seemed like they would be the logical thing to happen in the movie, or maybe subconsciously I did remember certain things, but they were just cracking jokes and being very relaxed, and I was like, something bad is about to happen.
Something bad does happen. The convoy gets attacked. A missile with Stark Industries on it hits the ground, explodes. Tony's flak vest saves him, kind of, but as he is losing consciousness and bleeding out, it flashes back to 24 hours earlier. We're introduced to more backstory about who Tony Stark is. He's a legacy rich kid. His father is Howard Stark, very obviously patterned after Howard Hughes, played by just some guy in photographs in this movie, but minor spoilers, there is some Howard Stark later on in Marvel.
Gasp.
And not this guy. So just some guy. But we also are introduced to Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane. You did not remember that Jeff Bridges was in this.
Nope.
I think Jeff Bridges looks good bald.
I do too. I loved his look, bald and bearded. Although I did think later on that it was a pretty intentional styling choice for the character.
Well, it's also patterned, I think, after the comic book character.
Okay, but I would think that the character also would be styled in that way. Jeff Bridges looked great with the bald head and the beard, but is very villain coded. That's
fair. He is. And the movie is a little shy about it. And I don't know if they wanted it to be a real big surprise that he is the villain. Were you surprised that Jeff Bridges was the ultimate bad guy?
No.
I mean, I wasn't either. I think the movie is kind of coy about it, but also they're like, nah, they're going to figure it out. So they didn't really do a big deal about hiding it. I think he casts such an intimidating figure. Like they really do. They play up his height and his size, and, you know, he towers over pretty much everyone else in the movie, and that makes him a very intimidating figure.
Even without it being very obvious that he was going to turn out to be the villain, he has a villain energy. That I think is why I wasn't surprised.
And I think that's interesting too, because it's so different from most of the characters that Jeff Bridges plays. I mean, iconically, he played the dude in The Big Lebowski. He's known for movies like Fearless and The Fisher King, where he does play different characters, or Tron. And I think he did really well playing this intimidating villain type.
Absolutely, without it being a caricature.
Well, there's one scene that's memed like crazy, but yes, we'll get to that.
Up until the end, I mean.
We're also introduced to Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes, played by Terrence Howard, this time and this time only.
Okay.
Rhodey is Tony Stark's best friend.
Was he fired for being Terrence Howard?
Basically.
Okay.
Yeah. He
and it's Don Cheadle.
It is now Don Cheadle for the rest of the Marvel universe. Yeah, he was paid more than Robert Downey Jr. because RDJ was such a risk and had to been in movie star jail.
I'm so happy for RDJ. Let me just interrupt and say that. I'm so glad that he recovered from that setback in his career. He's so great, and I'm just happy for him.
Yes, it is. This
is now the RDJ Fan Club podcast. Sorry for the interruption. Go on.
Yeah, it was a combination of, I think, wanting too much money for the sequel and then also being Terrence Howard. So, yeah, it was just sort of a, sorry.
Let's not and say we did.
Yeah. But in this one, it's Terrence Howard.
Okay.
So you can just kind of mentally pretend that Terrence Howard is played by
Don Cheadle.
Don Cheadle.
I'm happy to do that.
They are in Vegas to give Tony some kind of an award. Tony skips out to do some gambling and womanizing.
Mm-hmm.
We also are introduced to Happy Hogan, played by the director of the movie, Jon Favreau.
Yes. When you said that he directed this movie, I was thinking, but I don't think I said that I actually knew him more as an actor, just kind of a character actor who is in things. There wasn't any particular role that I associated him with specifically, so I didn't mention it, but then he was on screen and I was like, oh, Jon Favreau.
Swingers is one of my all-time favorite movies, so I love Swingers, so I always think of him when I think of Swingers.
Okay, well, I haven't seen it.
That one's going on the list.
Of course it is.
Happy Hogan is Tony Stark's bodyguard and driver. He meets the reporter. They go and have a very quick night together.
Rendezvous.
They have a quick rendezvous. That's a good way of putting it. And then we are introduced to the voice of Paul Bettany as Jarvis.
Oh, I didn't know that's who that was. That makes everything so much better.
In the comic books, Jarvis was an actual butler.
Okay.
And they decided not to go that route, because it just doesn't feel quite right for this character, but also, that's a very Batman thing too. Batman has a butler,
right?
And there probably was some,
and was a rich kid who likes to make toys.
So maybe distancing themselves from Batman a little bit too, but having Jarvis be an artificial intelligence, I think works very well.
Was Jarvis the human butler as sassy as Jarvis the AI assistant?
I believe so, but I'm not sure.
Because I loved that.
It's nice to have a sassy Alexa played by
100%
Paul Bettany.
Yes, love it.
And then introduced to Gwyneth Paltrow as Pepper Potts.
She did not leave a good impression on me in this first appearance in the movie because she was mean to the reporter. She makes that little sassy aside about taking out the trash. And I'm like, what did this lady do to you?
Well, she was digging for dirt on Tony Stark. Even after having sex with him, she was still, to be fair, doing her job.
Yeah.
But
I guess so, but I just thought that was very unnecessary.
They then take off on Tony's private jet to Afghanistan.
Yeah. Question about the private jet. The women who are on the plane, are they strippers or are they flight attendants that he pays to drink and dance on the stripper pole in addition to their flight attendant duties?
Or are they strippers that he pays for flight attendant duties?
That could...
Or are they flight attendants who are just partying and inebriated because he's fun?
Yeah. Do you know the answer?
I don't.
Okay.
But also I did think it was funny that there is a retractable stripper pole in the plane. So my money would be on the former, that they are strippers that are also employed as flight attendants.
Okay, fair enough.
Some of that.
They seem like they were having fun, so I'm not gonna knock it.
My question from the private plane scene that I came away with was, are you supposed to drink sake hot?
I do think that is a thing. I think you can have it hot or cold, but I'm not an expert, so I don't really want to weigh in too much on this topic.
That sounds awful to me. I think just generally warm alcohol in general sounds awful to me.
Ooh, a hot spiked cider, mulled wine. Okay.
Maybe like a spiked hot cocoa, maybe, but that's really just like...
At Christmas.
Yeah, but it's also just like a hot cocoa that is also getting you a little drunk. It's not like, just in general, I wouldn't want to drink like warm vodka or warm wine.
Well, but there is a drink with warm vodka, isn't there? Isn't there some kind of... I mean, there's... This is not important. But I do think I've heard of hot sake,
Okay.
is the bottom line.
One of the things I like about this movie is that it both respects international travel time, at least for the first half of the movie, and it also understands international time zone differences. I liked that when he video calls Obadiah after the Jericho test, it's very clearly the middle of the night in the U.S.
That's a nice touch.
They do the Jericho weapons test. It has the fun, iconic shot of him holding his arms open and it's surrounded by the exploding debris. And then they catch up from the flashback. Tony,
I was a little confused about the timeline. I don't think I really understood. Did it say 24 hours earlier on the screen?
I do believe it did.
I may have been making a note. And so I assumed that was a flashback. But then I was like, is this a different trip to the Middle East? But I figured it out eventually.
There you go. That's what you get for looking away from the screen.
Well, you didn't even know it was really Afghanistan. So
Tony then wakes up. He's survived thanks to the work of Jensen. Jensen kept the shrapnel from heading to his heart with an electromagnet connected to a car battery.
I feel like we could say that his heart belongs to Jensen. And you know what? Mine too. I love him.
He's a very sweet character.
He is. He's great.
The terrorists, or the Ten Rings, which are, I think, not technically a terrorist organization, if we're going to get into that, but there's definitely some retconning that goes on.
What is their motivation? Is it all money? Is it strictly financial?
Well, that's one of those things that, again, if you're looking at it in the context of just this movie, they're just terrorists or whatever, and they want to, the head terrorist, who I don't even think has a name. He's never actually named in this movie, but the leader of this group of terrorists says something about, if you have Stark weaponry like that, you could rule all of Asia.
Oh, yes, he does say that.
I think when you look at in the broader context of the MCU, that probably makes a little bit more sense when you look at what the Ten Rings are and what they do. They are, I believe, more of a criminal organization than a terrorist one. So they are more profit motivated. But again, in the context of 2008 and this movie, they read like terrorists.
Yeah, 100%.
Jensen gives Tony his motivational speech, and then Tony gets to work building the Iron Man Mark I suit.
For a real reason and not just for fun, as I had previously assumed.
Right, to get them out of the cave. So after some time in the cave, Tony suits up in the Mark I. Jensen goes and sacrifices himself to distract the bad guys and give Tony more time to finish booting up the suit.
What a good guy.
He doesn't actually shoot anyone because he is a doctor. So when he's running down the cave, he's not actually shooting at terrorists. He's just shooting in the air.
Hippocratic oath. He knew that he was going to die. I know he did when he sacrificed himself, but the whole time, because he says when he leaves here, he's going to be with his family. And then when he is sacrificing himself or about to, he tells Tony that his family's dead.
I think he assumed he was going to die. Okay. He knew that these guys sucked and murdered everyone. They had already killed his family. The lead bad guy says something about, this is why I kept you alive.
Why did he keep him alive?
To keep Tony Stark alive.
Oh. Okay.
And then there's the scene where they see the weapons cache outside and bad guy number 2 says, build us the Jericho weapon and then we'll let you go. And both Jensen and Tony are like, no, they won't.
Yeah.
So I think he just assumed that he wasn't going to make it out alive. And that's why he said that earlier on.
It was a very emotional moment.
Tony, then angered, destroys the weapon cache, lays waste to the camp, and flies away in kind of a cartoonish way, in a bit of a laugh moment after a very serious action scene. Tonally, it was a big shift. And then he crashes in the desert, which I feel
still would have killed him.
Right. This movie is good on time zones and bad on physics.
Yes.
You have to say, the way that he's moving around and he's tanking all of those bullet hits, he has somehow managed to build himself something that has some kind of an internal dampener. So he is somehow subverting physics by taking all of those heavy rounds and just tanking those. And so you can kind of extrapolate that, well, that's why he can survive that hit too. But
sure.
Yeah, that's the physics of it. He should be liquid several times in this movie.
Yes. Accurate.
Tony is then rescued from Arrakis after 3 months in captivity and comes back.
And the first thing he wants is
an American cheeseburger.
A cheeseburger.
I had heard that it was Burger King explicitly because that was related to Robert Downey Jr.'s recovery.
Oh.
He had ordered Burger King and there was something about it, like it was just trash and he was in a very bad state and he was eating it and it was like so awful. And so that was like his bottom. And so he's actually kind of grateful that he had Burger King. I'm sure I'm not telling the story exactly correct, but Burger King is actually linked to his recovery. So the fact that he was going to eat a cheeseburger, he was like, well, can it be Burger King?
Well, not if Burger King heard that it's because he considered them his rock bottom.
I don't know how apocryphal that story is either, but I've definitely heard it in several different places.
I also would want a cheeseburger after I had been in captivity for 3 months. I would want a cheeseburger if I had been in captivity for 3 hours.
You're going to want a cheeseburger after we're done recording.
Yes, I am.
And we had cheeseburgers last night.
I always want a cheeseburger. I'm like the guy in the Popeye cartoons that was eating a pile of cheeseburgers.
Right. No,
Wimpy, that's right.
Well, as long as you'll pay me Tuesday for a hamburger today. Tony comes back to the United States, has a reunion with everyone who thought he was missing or maybe dead, immediately has his press conference with his Burger King and announces that Stark Industries is no longer manufacturing weapons.
Yeah, it may not have been the best idea for him to go directly to a press conference after such a traumatic event. Somebody should have stopped him.
I think they tried to.
I don't know. I think the only resistance to the idea of having a press conference is he tells Pepper that he wants a burger and then a press conference, and she says, a press conference? And then cut to the press conference. I don't think she tried that hard.
I think everyone was trying to get him to chill out a little bit, but I think the idea is that Tony Stark is Tony Stark, and he does have a controlling interest in the company, so it was his family company.
True. Honestly, the moment that really made me believe that Jeff Bridges was going to be a villain was in this scene when he gives the press conference and announces that the company is going to stop manufacturing weapons. And Jeff Bridges is like, the most important thing is that Tony's back. I'm like, I actually feel like you'd be justified in being mad right now. And the fact that you're not makes me feel like you have an ulterior motive, a secret agenda. Also, Jeff Bridges kept pronouncing it man-ooo-facturing. Man-ooo-facturing.
Manufacturing.
We manufacture weapons.
Manufacture weapons. I can't do that. We're also introduced to Clark Gregg as Agent Phil Coulson.
From the blah, 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 blah. Long name.
Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement and Logistics Division.
That's basically what I said.
Yeah, they were clearly trying to do a backronym to get into SHIELD.
Yes, I figured out that it was SHIELD because I know how to spell. And then I was like, I feel like I've heard of SHIELD before.
SHIELD is a big deal in the comic books. I think it originally had a different acronym in the comic books, but they made it sound a little more 2008 when they gave it that acronym here, especially with the word Homeland in it. But yeah, SHIELD was a big deal in the comic books, but I thought it was so funny. When I first saw the movie, the way that Clark Gregg delivers the line, he is so nonchalant about it. It didn't even register to me that it was SHIELD until the end when he was just like, most people just say SHIELD. And then I was like,
I knew there must be some kind of joke in the name because of the exchange with Pepper, because that we meet him through him introducing himself to Pepper, I believe.
Yes.
And she says, that's quite a mouthful. And he says, yeah, we're trying to come up with a better name or something like that. And I was like, I feel like that seemed like a seed of something. And then later he says something similar to, I think, Tony. And then I was like, what is it? And that's when I realized it was S.H.I.E.L.D.
So Tony starts building his Mark II suit. He is so mean to his robot arm.
He calls it Butterfingers.
Well, yeah, he mostly calls it Dummy. That's when I think of the robot arm, I think of its name as Dummy, even though it doesn't. I don't know if it has an official name or not.
I assumed Butterfingers was its official name.
He calls it a lot of names. He starts the test flight with the boots, and the concrete smack. That physical comedy in that scene gets me every time.
You laughed very loudly.
It's a funny take. Again, there's Looney Tunes physics because him smacking into concrete that hard
would kill him.
Or at least give him some kind of trauma and have
spinal damage.
Have him like laid up for weeks again. But he's fine. He just lands on a car and then
sure.
And then Dummy hits him with the fire extinguisher. It's such a great bit of physical comedy, even if it is completely unrealistic. One of the things I really liked about it is that the suit feels plausible, especially when you're looking at it now in the context of the Marvel Universe now has literal wizards, witches, and aliens, and time travel, and all kinds of other shenanigans that we have yet to get to. Full-on comic book stuff. It started off very grounded, and they did a very good job making the suit feel real, even if, again, the physics of it aren't quite right.
It still feels science-based.
It still feels science-based. They do a lot of shots where you see the suit assembling and you see all the guts of the suit, and the scenes when he's got the prototype gloves and the prototype boots. Those scenes go a long way to making the movie grounded and getting people on board with this comic book universe. There's a gradual ramp up where you start off with, okay, maybe the physics aren't great, but it does seem plausible with fictional movie technology to, oh yeah, okay, so there's wizards now.
Yeah. No, I could definitely see that, because I think that over time, over the last 25 years, I'm not sure exactly how long, but there has been a gradual shift to nerd culture being mainstream culture and being more acceptable. So I could see how in the earlier days, there needed to be a hook for the person who would say, well, comic books, those are for losers. And then and it's not just comic books. I think it is also all the Star Wars movies, all the Star Trek movies, just other things, Harry Potter, even, just various things that have become so popular that now I think it's a lot more acceptable to just be full on nerd, fantasy, what have you.
I think you're right. I think that's a big part of it. You've got the Harry Potter kids who came of age. So even if you have people who weren't kids when Harry Potter came out, they're full-on adults now. And then you have the MCU was a huge part of making all of that mainstream. Lord of the Rings, of course.
Lord of the Rings, I forgot.
The resurgence of Star Wars that came back in 1999. So yeah, there were a lot of things that really pushed nerd culture to the forefront, which makes me happy. But it's also kind of like, man, my 12-year-old self would not believe the riches that we have in nerd media these days.
I honestly feel like it's more cool to be into nerdy stuff now than not. Like if somebody's like, I don't like any of that stuff, you'd be like, okay, you're kind of weird. Don't you think?
So there is the scene where Tony has to switch out his arc reactors. He's got the prototype that he built in the cave, and he's got a brand new shiny one that he needs to switch out, and he gets Gwyneth Paltrow to come help him out. I really do like this scene. It slows the movie down a little bit in a good way. It's a very good character moment for both of them, but also Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow have really good chemistry.
They do have good chemistry. I don't think it's romantic chemistry. And that is something that pops up a few times throughout the movie, not in this scene in particular. And I was happy that they did not really seem to be headed in a romantic direction at the end of the movie, but it's toyed with a little bit. But I don't think their chemistry is romantic.
Interesting. I think it is. I think it's fun in a His Girl Friday kind of way. He says, not having seen the movie His Girl Friday, but it is that they've worked together. They're very close and they have this sort of will they, won't they energy.
I felt it very platonically, but for me, it didn't seem like it would work. Will you tell me if they get together in subsequent films?
I believe I will leave that to you to find out in subsequent films.
All right. Well, but I do agree that this is a good scene for them. Although I have to say, the absolute most far-fetched thing in this entire movie is that Gwyneth Paltrow has never heard of the game Operation.
Had she not heard of it, or was she just
She's like, Operation, what are you talking about? And he's like, it's a game, never mind.
Well, she was stressed.
Everybody's heard of Operation.
There was a gaping hole in his chest with wires. She was freaking out. Okay. I think justifiably. There was goop.
No, I guess there was goop.
There was goop.
There was goop, and not the kind that she's used to.
So then after that, Tony finishes his suit. There's the Mark II test flight, which is a fun scene. One of the things that this movie did really well was there is a huge aversion in movies to having masked superheroes because you are hiding the superhero's face. You've paid all this money for an actor who is expressive and you're hiding him
presumably handsome.
Yeah. And you're hiding this good looking actor that you paid a lot of money behind a mask where you can't see their face. So in a lot of earlier movies, they sidestepped the mask or they came up with ways or excuses for the character to take their mask off, things like that. Iron Man is not even an expressive mask like Spider-Man or Deadpool, where you have the character making expressions with their mask in ways that you can't really do in real life. But his mask is very expressionless by design.
Right.
So coming up with that camera view where you see Robert Downey Jr.'s face and you see what he sees from his perspective, the holographic display, which is also just very nicely detailed and does respond to what's happening in the scene. It's not just numbers and letters flying around. It's actually contextual and makes sense. That was a big innovation and also really helped, I think, with the success and the popularity of the movie too.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about that in that scene, but I can see why that would be a good thing to have. You know, I just wasn't even really thinking about this idea that having a masked superhero would be counterintuitive to booking a big name to play said superhero. So that's interesting.
So after the test flight, Tony comes back and sees the gift of the old arc reactor, which he had told her to throw away, but instead she put it in a case for him with the inscription, proof that Tony Stark has a heart, which is nice and thematic.
Yes.
Tony overhears a charity party going on while he starts printing his Mark III suit and decides to go ahead and crash his own party. We have our first MCU Stan Lee cameo, where Stan Lee is playing Hugh Hefner.
Which I totally missed. We had to rewind so I could see him.
Did you think that it was Hugh Hefner?
I don't know that I really was. I don't know that I had an opinion.
Do you know what Stan Lee looked like?
Yes, because of Mallrats.
Oh. That's funny. So yes, you just didn't catch it this time.
No.
He does have a moment with Pepper where he asks her to dance. I think she reacts entirely appropriately to this. She's like, you're my boss. This is weird. It's awkward. But I think they had fun chemistry, which was teetering on romantic.
Okay,
if nothing else.
You know, it's up for interpretation. I think I'm not going to say that your perspective on it is wrong, but I did definitely take note of that scene. Well, especially when they're talking after they dance, where I feel like she is making an incredibly valid argument about how people know that he's a womanizer. And so it's going to make her look maybe like an opportunist or have people that interact with them in a professional context, to not take her as seriously because they think that she's just his next conquest. I do feel like her argument was a little bit undermined by the fact that they almost kiss in that scene. So I don't know, maybe that contributed to my feeling like I don't want this to become romantic.
They are on the balcony when they almost kiss, so it's not that anyone can see that.
No, I know, but I mean undermined in the sense that I feel like what she was saying was very valid. And it's not so much that I thought, oh, well, now she's going to get seen doing this, but more just don't kiss him after you say that.
That's a good point. Yeah, when you think about it, Tony Stark is clearly the kind of CEO who doesn't like doing CEO-y things. So I think later movies make this a little bit more clear. But even though she is his assistant, and in the comic books, Pepper Potts starts as just his secretary, in the 1960s, whatever. In this, I feel like it's more fair to say she's not just an executive assistant. She's like his right hand. And so she's probably doing a lot of executive-y things and interacting with a lot of people that he doesn't want to interact with because he wants to go invent stuff. So,
Right.
So now she has to have like awkward conversations with the CFO and the CTO
Yeah.
after they've seen her at the charity event dancing with Tony.
Yeah, no, I think what she was saying made perfect sense to me. And he goes in to get them drinks and she asks for a martini with a lot of olives, like 3 olives. And I was like, 3 olives is not a lot.
It's not? Well,
Not to me. If I asked you to get me a martini with a lot of olives, I would expect like a dozen.
I mean, it is 300% of the olives that would be normally in a martini. So normally there's just 1 olive in a martini, right? So there's...
I actually don't know for sure. I thought that 3 on a toothpick was kind of standard.
I think that's a lot of olives.
A dozen.
A dozen.
I would want a martini glass just filled with olives, no other ingredients.
So just bring me a glass of olives.
Yeah.
In fact, just leave them in the jar.
No.
Just forget the glass.
No, the glass is fancier.
The glass makes it fancier. Okay, that's fair. Do you still want the toothpick?
No, that'll just get in my way.
Maybe you should just have a little bit of gin on the toothpick.
Oh, yeah, so reverse martini.
Yeah, it's a reverse martini.
Good idea.
While he's getting the martinis, he runs into Christine Everhart again, who lets him know that his weapons are being sold to terrorists,
Yes.
to the 10 Rings, and that enrages Tony. He finds out that he's double dealing and selling to both sides, and he goes to confront Stane about it, and Obadiah Stane then tells him that, yes, I am double dealing and I'm the one who's been moving against you in the corporate politics that are only background conversation in this movie. There's definitely some corporate manipulation, but it's all just in dialogue.
I want to talk about Christine for a second. When I mentioned earlier that I think that the female characters are interesting, it's these back-to-back scenes that I was thinking of in particular, because again, I do feel like I appreciated Pepper's argument about why it didn't make her look good to be seen dancing with him. And then I really liked that when Christine confronts him, he doesn't remember her name. And she has to remind him, even though they did have a night together. But then her big issue is not that he didn't remember her, that he didn't remember their night together, or he didn't call or what. I mean, he was in captivity, but still like... it wasn't about their personal connection. Her problem is that he said that he was going to stop selling weapons, and then she's found out that Stark Industries has provided weapons to terrorist organizations. I just really liked that was her problem in that scene, and not anything about him being kind of a cad. I feel like that's a little unusual.
Tony goes home, watches the news and stews, and then suits up with his Mark III suit and goes into action. The scene where the terrorists are raiding the town, that also to me felt a little more dark now.
Yes.
And I don't know, again, if that's just maybe with age or with time passing or just kind of where we're at now in the world, it felt a lot scarier, I think, than it did at the time, which is strange because in 2008 we were in the midst of having soldiers there and that really going on. Maybe it's just having lived with it for 20 something years.
Maybe. Well, I think that I'm trying to remember back to 2008, and I can't recall specifically in that year, but in the early to mid 2000s, I feel like public consciousness in the US was still geared towards Middle East bad, and thinking about our relationship with terrorist groups and not so much about the civilians in those countries who are also affected by war and violence and the weapons that are provided to certain groups, violent groups. Whereas I think now we are more aware of that and maybe, again, as a society, care more about that than we may have in the early and mid 2000s.
I think that's fair, but it does work very well because when Tony does show up to murder all of the terrorists, you don't feel even a tiny little bit bad for any of them.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You made a noise. The first one, he just knocks into a wall and you made a noise.
I gasped, but I didn't feel bad for him.
Right. So Tony leaves and is then hunted down by 2 United States F-22s. That's a fun scene too. He calls Rhodey while he's trying to avoid the jets. Remember ringtones? I remember ringtones. Some of the 2008 tech in this movie, especially mixed with the movie tech, is very funny to see when you see like a 2008 era phone or laptop, but then it's next to like the holographic table that he does his work on and the Iron Man suit and all of that stuff.
It's cute.
Tony gets in the dogfight with the pilots, accidentally gets knocked off of one and makes the other one crash, but then he goes out of his way to prove that he does have a heroic streak and he is the hero type. He goes, saves the pilot whose ejector seat is failing. Then there's the funny gag, the hard cut to the training exercise excuse where Rhodey says, how am I supposed to explain a crashed plane and everything? And Tony says, just say it was a training exercise. That's what you always say. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. And then it cuts to him saying it's a training exercise. Pepper comes downstairs and that's when I clocked that she's wearing Louboutins. I saw the very red undersides of the shoes. So whatever her function is, she is very well paid, I assume.
Either well paid or there is the gag about how she's buying her own birthday presents from Tony.
Right.
And she buys the dress that she wears to the party. So I thought maybe the Louboutins were also a gift from quote unquote Tony.
I think that, not to get too much into this, but in later movies, it becomes more clear how much of the executive side of Tony's job he outsources to Pepper. I don't think it's a stretch to believe that she's making 7 figures easily. Stain then shows up to the terrorist camp and is unequivocally revealed as the movie's big bad. His security team dispatches all of that group of 10 Rings guys.
What did he do to the head guy with the burned face?
He's got that sonic incapacitator. It's not named, but it's a gadget that he says essentially it works on some kind of sonics because he has the active headphones that protect him. As soon as he flips it on, the headphone lights come on too.
Okay.
So the headphones are clearly protecting him, but yeah.
It's like exploding his brain.
He does because he does it to Tony later on. So you see it basically just makes him paralyzed.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Tony is driven to get rid of all of his weapons, so he sends Pepper into the office because he is currently... Is it because... I'm not clear if it's he doesn't go to the office because he can't because of the legal action of the board, or he doesn't want to get caught, or he's just busy doing Iron Man stuff. Either way, he sends Pepper with a USB drive to get secret files because he wants to know where all of the weapons caches are. But then Pepper then discovers that Obadiah Stane actually hired the 10 Rings in the first place to execute Tony. It was actually a hit and not a kidnapping.
Yes.
But when they found out that it was Tony Stark, they knew that he was more valuable alive, and they also attempted to extort Obadiah Stane for more money.
It's very convenient that they say Obadiah's full name on the tape.
And he didn't delete the video either. Yes, very convenient for plot's sake. I do like that scene just from a perspective. It shows that Pepper is not a helpless woman character. She's clever. She's good on her feet, even though she does spend a lot of time in the third act running around and screaming.
Well, I didn't love what happens to her character in the last act. I just think that once it's the big confrontation and she's at, it's a factory or warehouse, just a company, the headquarters.
It's at the Los Angeles plant
Okay.
where they have the factory that has the arc reactor in it.
Once she gets there, after she informs S.H.I.E.L.D., I can't remember the guy's name.
Agent Coulson.
Agent Coulson.
Agent Phil Coulson.
After she informs him of what she's found out by viewing the secret files on Obadiah's computer, and they are trying to go after him to apprehend him, I just feel like she's not really damseled because she's still doing things, but she just seems she seemed so competent to me up until that last act. And then all of a sudden she's just like, what do I do? What's going on? What? Oh, Tony, no.
I think that's consistent because if you think about the scene when she is helping him replace the arc reactor, and she's also very squeamish about it.
Well, I think that's different. I feel like what she's doing in that scene is very different to what is happening in the last act, because that is disgusting.
I think when you have a giant armored Jeff Bridges running at you, trying to kill you, running and screaming is a perfectly appropriate reaction. When you have a bunch of glass falling on you, screaming is a perfectly good reaction. And when you are operating this giant generator,
all right,
freaking out about it, I think that it's a good characterization because she is a little squealy and squeaky, but also she is very competent and brave, and she runs back into the factory to help Tony, and she doesn't hesitate really with all of that stuff. The only time she hesitates is when she's afraid that it'll kill him. That's really the only thing she hesitates on. You know, she doesn't hesitate to narc and tell the government when she knows what's up. So yeah, I think her character is I think it's fair for a character to be dainty and feminine, but also not necessarily useless in a fight.
Okay,
or
all right. I stand corrected.
And I will say, you know, Pepper's characterization does grow through the movies, and she gets other opportunities to do more, I think. We did get a little bit ahead after this scene. Obadiah Stane goes to a scientist played by Peter Billingsley, who was the kid in A Christmas Story.
Oh, I thought that name sounded familiar.
So Peter Billingsley is the scientist who cannot replicate Tony Stark's work on the miniaturized arc reactor. And there is the very memed scene where Stane loses it and Jeff Bridges yells, "Tony Stark built this in a cave with a box of scraps." It's such a great line, but it's memed a lot.
I've never seen it.
Well, it's a funny line, and Jeff Bridges' delivery with that pause in the middle just makes it funnier, I think.
I thought it was good. I liked it. He's scary.
So because Stane can't reproduce the miniaturized arc reactor, he goes to Tony, incapacitates Tony, and steals the arc reactor from Tony's chest, which will eventually cause the shrapnel that's still in him to enter into his heart and kill him.
But thank God Pepper kept the original one.
And thank God she put it in just glass and not lucite.
Good point.
Because how terrible it would have been. He gets to that dramatic scene where the robot arm hands him the case and he goes to slam it on the ground and it just goes thump and nothing happens.
Very anticlimactic.
And then he dies. No, she did put it in glass, fortunately, and it wasn't tempered glass either. So he just smashes it and is able to save himself by putting in the old prototype arc reactor. That sets up the final confrontation when he suits up and flies off, leaving Rhodey behind to look at the Mark II suit, which is silver, and say, next time. And we as the audience say, yeah, but not you.
But the character does get to wear the suit.
Spoilers.
I'm guessing yes.
So they have their final fight. Marvel movies have a pattern that was established here where you have the main guy having a fight with an evil version of the main guy. I think it's a fun fight. I think the special effects have held up very well. I love the scene with the family in the car that get lifted up.
I felt so bad for them.
They have a perfectly appropriate reaction to that when she just floors it and runs over Tony. The poor motorcycle guy who just gets flung off and then his motorcycle gets used as a weapon. But it's a fun staged fight. There's a nice callback to the icing that happened earlier during the training montage. That's not enough to put Stain down, though. So that's when you have to set up Pepper running back into danger to set up the arc reactor overload and to get Obadiah Stane that way.
Did Jeff Bridges add a voice modulator to his suit? Because when Tony talks, he just sounds like himself. But when Obadiah talks, he sounds like a robot. A very menacing robot.
He does sound a lot more menacing. I think they leaned into that, and I do think they made him sound more robotic and more menacing when he's speaking out of the suit.
I mean, it seems like, when did he have time to add that little feature?
He added a lot. I mean, that's not the original suit from the cave. It's based on the original suit because they find the original suit, and his suit is much bigger and has a lot of other things going on.
I guess that's true. It just seems like a funny thing to, I mean, I know that the voice sounded that way because it was very effective in, him being the villain. But at the same time, if you do think that it's a feature that needed to be added, it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it's user stories where he's going through and giving directions to the engineers, and one of them is make voice scarier.
Yeah, the Peter Billingsley was like, well, I can't make a mini arc reactor, but I did get the voice modulator just right.
That's really funny. They have their big confrontation. Tony goes ahead and tells Pepper to light up the reactor, thinks he might die in a very heroic way, but gets out of the way just in the nick of time. And Obadiah Stane is taken out with a sky beam, Marvel's first of many.
I have to admit that I was a little bit confused about what was happening in this big, dramatic, climactic scene because there was just a lot going on. So my questions were, would Obadiah have survived if he hadn't opened the suit so that the human man, was visible, presumably to give his I'm a villain speech?
Potentially, but maybe not. Okay. I think because what the arc reactor did was totally shut down the suit.
Oh, okay.
So the suit still would have been shut down. It still would have fallen through. There still would have been a big explosion. He might have been protected because, we know that the suits can defy physics and take a lot. They can take tank rounds. They can take a lot of damage. So he might have been okay in a dead suit, and then SHIELD agents could run up and arrest him. But yeah, because
why did he open the suit? To give the I'm a villain speech?
Well, it was effective because he did give the I'm a villain speech, but also because Tony Stark ripped out his camera. Remember?
Oh, yes.
He ripped out the camera feed and also disabled the aiming, which is why he isn't able to shoot Tony.
Right. And then also, where was Pepper? Because it felt like Pepper also would have been killed.
Well, she did run off. Apparently there was enough time for her to run off. But yes, as the sky beam was getting fired up, you saw the energy all around her, and then she just got the hell out of there.
She booked it.
She did. And those Louboutins, no less.
I've never worn them. Maybe they're a good running shoe.
That's why they're so expensive.
That must be it.
So then the movie is wrapping up. Tony does survive. Agent Coulson gives him Card Street with an alibi on it and excuses for what is going to happen. He drops the line, just call a SHIELD. And that's the moment where it was like, oh, it's SHIELD from the comics. Tony goes to his press conference. Christine Everhart interrupts and asks him the pointed question. He has his speech about not being the hero type, and then he closes the movie with, I am Iron Man.
I rolled my eyes.
Really?
Yes.
It's such a fun moment.
It is. Yes, it's fun. RDJ, charming in any circumstance. Love him. It was great. But also at the same time, I was like, you are such a bad listener.
And then we have Marvel's first post-credits scene.
And from what you said, it seems like that is a standard component of Marvel movies.
It is. They did it for fun on this. One of the things they wanted to do is just have a little bit of an Easter egg for fans, and they didn't really want to confuse people at the end of the movie. Like, wait, why is Samuel L. Jackson showing up at the end of the movie? But if you put it at the end credits, then it becomes, a fun thing. They didn't really have a plan at this point. Again, this was an indie movie. At this point, they were making 2 films, and that's really all they had in them. They had Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk. They were not owned by Disney. They didn't have that kind of money. So Kevin Feige, at this point, the future head of Marvel Studios, had it in his mind that he could maybe get there, but this was just a fun, like, what if we have some fun with this? The post-credit scene is Tony coming home to a hacked house and Samuel L. Jackson standing there telling him he's Nick Fury. Originally in the comics, Nick Fury is an older white guy. He does have the eye patch, but he's a white guy with gray streaks in his hair. He was originally played on screen by David Hasselhoff.
Oh.
And I think a TV movie for NBC, I don't know, in the 90s or early 2000s, sometime around there.
If you paid me $1 million to say true or false that David Hasselhoff and Samuel L. Jackson had played the same character, I would have lost. I would have lost.
That's funny. I should have asked you about that. There's a lot of history for these characters. So they made a series of comics called The Ultimates, which was a separate universe and a separate continuity, so they could retell earlier stories for all of these characters and have younger versions of all of these characters without having to contradict those decades of continuity. In the Ultimates universe, they borrowed, without permission, Samuel L. Jackson's likeness for Nick Fury. So they had recast in the comics this older white guy as Samuel L. Jackson without telling him. Samuel L. Jackson says he still read comics at the time and bought one and was surprised to see himself in a comic. So when it came to cast the character, Samuel L. Jackson was an obvious shoo-in. They thought at the time this after credit scene would just be kind of a fun thing for the fans. And then it turns out that, like, the Monday after the movie came out, Entertainment Weekly had stories on who is Nick Fury and what's going on. I do remember hearing, like, you want to stay till after the credits. I didn't know what was going to happen, but just Samuel L. Jackson showing up. And then he says, I want to talk to you about the Avengers. That just made nerd heads everywhere just completely explode.
I'm sure.
So that was fun. And yes, not every Marvel movie or project has an after credits scene, but most of them, the vast majority of them do. The vast majority of them do.
The vast majority.
The vast majority of them. So that was Iron Man.
I did like it. I didn't mean to make it sound at the beginning like I didn't enjoy it. I remembered liking it more than I did, but I still liked it.
It's a fun movie. Like I said, it is very tight. And I think it did a great job of both getting people to like this C-string comic book character who most people, unless they were nerds, would have no idea who that character was. And now he's one of the biggest characters ever. And so much of that is because how well this movie did and how well Robert Downey Jr. did in this movie. And now we have the most successful movie franchise of all time.
And we are embarking upon that. Am I correct?
We
It
are.
is time now.
Yes,
Okay.
it is time.
Oh, goodness. All right.
Ooh. It's my Lion King.
Lovely.
Any closing thoughts?
I mean, I do have some random stray thoughts.
Let's do it.
Okay. So when Tony announces at the press conference that Stark Industries is no longer going to manufacture, as Obadiah says,
Right.
manufacture weapons, and Obadiah is talking to him about it after the conference, and he says, "So what? We're going to make baby bottles now?" I'm like, yes, those are the only two options. Weapons of mass destruction
Or baby
or
bottles.
baby bottles. There's no in between. Also, when another character commenting on Tony's decision to stop manufacturing and selling weapons is Terrence Howard says to him, "You a humanitarian now or something?" Like, oh my God, how awful would that be if he was a humanitarian? Can you imagine? I thought Tony made a good point about Pepper's value system when she quits because he is going to go into the fray to try to stop violence. And she's like, well, then I quit. And he's like, so you were with me this whole time
Right.
that we were profiting from the sale of weapons. But now that I'm trying to protect people, you're out. And she's like, well, you're going to kill yourself. And I'm like, still, he's right.
And also, if he does kill himself, he's probably left most of his stuff to her because he doesn't have an heir. So, like,
Well, but she, I guess, loves him.
yeah, she does love him.
Yeah. When the robot arm
Dummy.
dummy / Butterfingers gives him the glass encased first arc reactor, Tony says, "Good boy." And I was like, his devices really are like his pets, and I love it.
I would say, yeah, Dummy is definitely like a pet. Jarvis is more like a friend.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I don't like Dummy. Butterfingers. He's like a pet.
But you did enjoy Iron Man,
I did, yes.
just not as much as you thought
not
you
as
were
much
going
as
to.
not as much as I remembered. But again, I really think that was the element of surprise of thinking that I wasn't going to enjoy a superhero movie. I watched it with an ex-boyfriend, so it was like, I know, I'm sorry, just kidding. But it was a situation where he wanted to watch it and I wanted to be cool. So I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to like this, but sure. And then I did like it, which surprised me. And so this time I went into it thinking, yeah, Iron Man, I'm totally on board. And I was like, oh, yeah, it was okay. I think the first time I saw it, I thought I was going to hate it. But I think if there was one thing that you have probably learned about me at this point, it's that I don't know if I'm going to like a lot of things. And then 9 times out of 10, I do. So I don't know.
You're very easy to please.
I guess so.
That bodes well for me. One of the things I didn't talk about, they were running around and rewriting things on the day when they were shooting. It is really a miracle that this movie came together the way that it did. It was an indie production. Their star was in movie star jail. They had to fight for everything. They had a director who hadn't done anything of this scale before, and the script kept changing, and there was a lot of writing dialogue and improvising on the day of as well. So yeah, it came together amazingly well given the production hell it was in, but it worked. It landed, and it is a very good movie, I think, and definitely set the stage for the entertainment juggernaut that is Marvel Studios.
Here we go.
Here we go. And there we go. Thank you for listening. This has been Blind Spots and Second Thoughts. I'm Dan.
I'm Heather.
And we'll catch you next time.